Good afternoon, everyone. As I said, my name is Whitney Stoll. I'll be your DC Post First Friday webinar host. And welcome back to our First Friday webinar series and our April webinar with our guest Kurtis Minder from GroupSense on how to prevent and respond to ransomware and other cyber threats. Joined by me is Samantha Long and Bree Beal, who are behind the scenes moderating our webinar today and also monitoring the chat. So we have nearly 75 registered participants from all around the world ready to learn about today's First Friday webinar. In today's webinar, Kurtis is going to be discussing ransomware prevention, response strategies, and best practices to safeguard your organization. But first, I'd like to welcome you all to our First Friday webinar series, which is provided to you through SAMA's commitment to offering the AEC industry and community effective training, development, and networking programs. The DC Post is helping sustain the future of the profession with these monthly education-focused sessions aligned with SAME's strategic goals to drive partnerships, deliver solutions, and develop people. So thank you all for joining us today as we start our program. So please feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself. Share your LinkedIn profile and contact information with everyone throughout the program today. Ask questions in the chat so we can address them during the Q&A portion at the end. Also, for those using the WebEx desktop application, you have the option to save the chat at any time by going to File, Save As, and going down to Save Chat. We are recording this webinar, and the video will be on our YouTube channel later on this month. A copy of the slides, your PDH certificate, and an opt-in list of the attendees will be emailed to you as soon as the webinar ends. So look for an email labeled document delivery with the subject line with your download for your downloads following this webinar. So we are excited to provide you an hour of education and virtual networking, no matter where you're calling in from today. So we would like to take a moment to thank our DC Post First Friday sponsors, Fox Rothschild, KCCT, Parsons Corporation, and Stantec. We truly appreciate your support, and we are grateful for your generosity by making this webinar series possible for our members and the SAME community. If you're not already a DC Post sponsor and would like to support our post with annual sponsorship, we'd love to be able to add your name to the slide for future programs and events this year. Annual Platinum sponsors and First Friday sponsors help support this webinar with free registration for SAME members and full-time students. So please visit our website for more information about sponsorship levels and how you can get back to your SAME community through your DC Post sponsorship. And now it's time for the main program. So please note that this program will provide one professional development hour from the DC Post. And I'm not going to read through the learning objectives on this slide, since most of you saw the same objectives when you registered. Instead, I'm going to introduce to you our featured speaker in just a moment. And while I do the introduction, if you haven't done so already, please feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself, share contact information, your LinkedIn profile, and where you're calling in from today. This is your webinar series to help you learn about the special topic, as well as help you expand your business network during the program. Use the chat during throughout the presentation to share comments and ask questions to our presenter. If there's a particular slide you want to talk about, please share that detail in your chat question. We'll answer the questions at the end of the program, and as well, as I mentioned, don't forget to save the chat before you exit the webinar. And now, please let me welcome our presenter, Kurtis Minder, to the DC Post First Friday webinar. Kurtis is the co-founder and CEO of GroupSense, a leading provider of digital risk solutions with over 30 years of cybersecurity experience. He is a world-renowned ransomware negotiator and has led negotiations in some of the world's largest ransomware and data extortion cases, working with federal, state, and local agencies, including the State Department, New York Cyber Command, State of California, and others. In this session, Kurtis is going to share expert insights on ransomware prevention, incident response planning, and how organizations can strengthen their cybersecurity posture. So, welcome, Kurtis, and now I'm gonna turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Winnie. I'm gonna share some slides. Can we see those?
We can see them.
All right, great. Thank you, Whitney, for having me. It's an honor. Thanks everybody for attending. I did take a little bit of poetic license with your title and change it around a little bit. I do refer to this as a cyber war. I'm not trying to be hyperbolic, and I'll talk a little bit about why I say that. I do believe that these cyber attacks, I'm sure you guys have heard about them on the news, are a national security issue, and every person, including everyone on this call, can play a role in protecting themselves, but also our country. A little bit about me. Oh, this didn't format quite right, did it? A little bit about me. I started a company called GroupSense a little over 11 years ago with the focus on taking the fight to the bad guys. And what we do at GroupSense is a little unique. I'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide, but it is a digital risk company. We do a lot of interesting things around cyber espionage, but also part of that, we do a lot of ransomware response work. That started a little bit before COVID and really snowballed on us over the years. And we've become one of the leading firms to provide the service. Most of our clients are brought to us on the ransomware response side are brought to us by large law firms and sometimes insurance companies. A lot of clients also, sort of come to us organically. I run a team. Initially when we started, it was just me. I run a team of folks who help with this, sort of engaging with the threat actors. And I'll go into a little bit of detail in the slides here. But fundamentally, I have a strange job, right? I obviously run a cybersecurity company. That in itself isn't strange. The stuff that GroupSense does on a daily basis might surprise some people. Some of you may be familiar, but there are companies like GroupSense in the industry who perform effectively espionage on other threat actors, as we call them, or sort of the more colloquial hackers in other countries and in the US. We do, if you're familiar with the intelligence cycle and some of the processes around that, we're performing some form of digital human operations on these guys. We have teams of folks who speak 20 languages. They end up befriending these bad guys on Telegram channels and underground chat rooms and dark web forums, and they think we're other bad guys. And then we learn, sort of what they're up to, and that's the tip of the spear of what we do. The more strange part is the ransomware response part, where I spend a significant amount of my time either sort of choreographing or myself interacting with cyber criminals all over the world. I end up negotiating ransoms or negotiating down ransoms, or sometimes talking to those folks to just buy time for the victim. And I'll talk about what that means. It's a very unique, there's not very many people who do this on a daily basis. And we've done a lot to mature that process, and I'll talk about that too. I won't go through the statistics. I think you guys hear about it in the news already enough. Ransomware is bad. It's happening all the time. And even if I put these statistics up here yesterday, they're already out of date. The ransomware attacks are actually increasing, not decreasing. And the threat actors have gotten more clever about how they do that. And I'll talk about how that impacts everyone on the call and what you can do to avoid it. Here's some things that I've learned. So, having been on the front lines of just cyber criminal activity in general, but then also as a responder to cyber crime cases against businesses and governments, I've learned quite a few things about what's different about these kinds of attacks and why they're important to try to defend against. First and foremost, I think a lot of organizations think of a cyber attack on an entity or their company as holistically, a cyber attack is a cyber attack, but effectively that's not the case, right? So these cyber attacks are quite different than other cyber attacks. And as a result, you have to treat the way that you respond to them differently. A normal cyber attack, let's say 5 years ago, people would get a cyber attack and it would be some bad guy has broken into your system and they have taken something from you. Maybe they've taken a server offline or something like that. And the best way I could describe the impact of that is it's it's annoying. The bad guys were annoying 5 or 10 years ago. It was annoying, and maybe you were subject to some compliance, or you had to pay a fine or something similar. But it's not the same as ransomware. In the case of ransomware, now, especially these days, they are super effective at basically taking everything offline. And when I say everything, I mean everything. So obviously your email is not going to work. You're not going to be able to talk to your partners or contractors. You're not going to be able to take orders or place orders. You may not be able to make payroll, but also you probably can't use your phones. The access control systems in your building will stop working. I've had cases where the threat actors have taken the HVAC systems offline. Another thing to consider is in these cases, the threat actors who do these tend to have what we call a very long dwell time, meaning they're in your systems for sometimes months before they actually execute the attack. And what are they doing? So the first thing that they're doing is they're taking a copy of as much of your information as they can. And they're trying to do this in a way that you don't notice. So they're not just transferring terabytes a day, but they're trickling information out very carefully over time into a dark web server someplace that they control. Then they put some special software on your systems that when they hit the magic red button, everything stops working. And when we build, traditionally when companies build business continuity processes and disaster recovery processes, they don't account for this kind of scenario. They usually, like for example, in business continuity, you might say, what will we do if this server goes down? Or what will we do if this office goes offline? Seldom do we test, how do we recover if nothing works? And so for those of you who do that kind of work, you know that when you bring things back online from a backup, if you're lucky enough to still have those, you have to do things in a very specific order. And also, especially if you're talking about a disaster recovery center, those backups might be far away. And it might take time to transfer those very large amounts of data and things like that. So there's a lot of nuances to this that make it quite different. When you are attacked, you will see, or someone will see or find a ransom note. And that's what's on your screen now. It's a little bit truncated, but I'll give you a summary of what these are like. There are literally hundreds of ransomware actor groups. Most of them are based in Eastern Europe or Russia, or a Russia-friendly country like Belarus, Moldova, parts of Ukraine. There are small percentages that come out of Iran, North Korea, and other countries, but most of them are actually Russian or Russian Eastern European influenced countries. So first off, you'll notice that there's not the best sort of language here. They don't speak English as a first language. That's common. All of the ransom notes I've seen are largely templatized. They look very similar. So they're going to tell you who they are. They're very proud of their brand. So in this case, they said your network was penetrated and all your files and data has been encrypted by Ragnar Locker. So they want you to know who they are. Then they'll tell you what happened. And they explain what they did at a high level. They tell you what you should do and what you should not do. And when they tell you what you should do, if I summarize all of those bullets, they're basically saying contact us. And that's where my company comes into play. It's almost like, you think about you're driving down the street, you drive past a car lot, you see a car that you're interested in, you call the car dealer to just ask some questions about the car you saw. And they don't really want to tell you on the phone. They want you to come in and speak to the manager, right? So they want to sit you in front of you. Same thing with these guys. They don't want to do a transaction sort of tactically. They really want to engage in a dialogue. And that's where the negotiation part. And if you look through what's on the screen now, you'll see several times they use the word make a deal. They talk about making a deal. So that's what they intend to do. The sticker the sticker price is not what you will pay. What they tell you not to do, and you can see these at the very top here, says do not modify, rename, copy, or move any files that you might damage. That's true. That's actually true. If you think about what people commonly do when their computer's acting funny, is not working or locked up, they reboot it. In the case of ransomware, that's a bad idea because the encryption software that they've used to lock those files is unstable often, and sometimes that makes the machines unrecoverable. So there's one thing that's very different about how you would normally behave in an instance. Do not use any third-party or public decryption software. So if you went right now to Google, and I'm not suggesting you do this, and you said how to decrypt Ragnar Locker, which is something that a victim might do on a separate machine somewhere, a lot of the results that you will get up front from Google are companies that claim to be data recovery companies or data restoration companies. Most of those are actual frauds or other scams. The bad guys are using typically high-end encryption that, if there was a company that could develop software that could decrypt it, we would have other bigger national security issues. So what I'm saying is that doesn't exist. There aren't companies that can just decrypt the software that these bad guys are using without the actual decryption keys that the bad guys have. So they're scams. So they're actually giving you good advice there. They also tell you not to shut down or reset your system. So that's what I said earlier. You can corrupt things. You can break things when you do that, especially if you're talking about things like virtual machines. So interestingly enough, what the ransom notes do not contain is the amount. You won't find how much they're asking. They don't tell you that until you contact them. When you do contact them, you might see something like this. And by the way, when I say you do, I would suggest that you don't contact them. These guys are very, very good at manipulating and coercing people into making poor decisions about the situation. They're going to do double extortion, which is one, hey, we have a copy of a bunch of your critical information and private information and confidential information and possibly classified information. We have a copy of that. And if you don't pay us immediately, we're going to either sell or start leaking that information on the dark web. That's number one. And number two, all of your systems are down and they will remain down until you pay us and we give you the special decryption key, right? So when you decide as an organization to engage these threat actors, you should have a professional help you with that. And that's what we do. This is an example of what you would see if you logged into one of their dark websites. This is what we call a ransomware victim site. It's usually custom to your particular attack vector, so they know it's you. You don't even have to go into the chat for them to know that you're there, because there's logs that tell them that you've come there, and you're the only one that has the location of that. It's on the ransom note. They often have a clock or a timer that's a threat. Everything on this page, by the way, is negotiable. They'll make it sound like it's not, but it absolutely is. In this case, they give you a threat that says that these threats vary, but in this case, they're giving you a threat to say that if you don't pay on time, that they're going to double the price. They've been nice enough to do the math for us. 200,000 times 2 is 400,000. Surprise. Thank you, guys. But where I spend most of my time is in the button that says chat support. When you click on that, there's a window that looks a lot like a text message screen. And that's where I will talk to the bad guys on behalf of the victim to find out, what they want and what actually do the negotiation itself. But also we try to get some validation from them about what they took. If they claim to have a bunch of data, we want to see a file list and determine if that's actually legitimate. So that's where my team will spend a lot of the time. Again, I suggest that you engage a professional and not try to go here yourself. And some of the mistakes I've seen here is, unfortunately with negotiations, they're really, we have a saying that negotiations end well and they start well. In this case, if you start talking to the bad guys before you call me, it starts a momentum or a trajectory that is hard for me to reverse. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult. The bad guys don't care if we switch pictures. So, it's best to have me on the front end of this or someone who does this for a living. The other thing I mentioned several times that they've taken copies of our data. This is extremely important to understand the scale of this. And this is something that I've actually briefed members in committees of Congress about. I actually briefed a U.S. Senator yesterday about some of this. But basically, because as part of their standard operating procedure, they take a bunch of data. And because they are operating in an unfriendly country, the threat actors who do this are offered sort of an unofficial amnesty by their government, Russia, Belarus, etc. They're not getting arrested by their government for doing this, right? So it is logical to assume there is a quid pro quo for that amnesty, one of which might be monetary. Let's assume that the government is going to get some of the profits from this, but also that the government might get a copy of the information that they took from you as part of that initial breach. So if that's true, and it seems to be standard operating procedure in every case I've been in, you can assume that the Russian government has exabytes of our corporate, municipal, and government data over a 10-year period. And that's very dangerous from a national security perspective. From a victim perspective, this is what this Lockbit's, I'm sure you've heard about on the news, one of the more prolific groups. This is an example. I have to blur out, obviously, some of this, but Lockbit maintains a myriad of these sites that they call ransomware shame sites. And this is where they list all of their victims. So, you know, if you're attacked by them and you don't respond in a reasonable amount of time, they're going to put your name on this site, and then they're going to put a clock that ticks down to when they will release the data that they took from you to the other bad guys on the dark web. You can see on this page, it's a little bit blurred, but you can see they show how many times each one of these victims has been looked at by other people. And if it's published, it goes green, says published, and there'll be a link for those people. Anybody who visits that site can just click on and download the information that they stole from you. It's terrible. And every one of these ransomware actors has something similar to this related to the stolen data. And to speak a little bit to the sophistication of these guys, they have built custom software to do this. So when they go into a network initially, they run a code that basically automatically spreads itself around the network. It automatically shuts down your endpoint control systems. It automatically deletes your log files. It does all of these things automatically to remain undetected over time. And like I said, they'll sit in the network and let this spread and continue to grow over sometimes months. I've had cases where the bad guys have been in there for nearly a year and took 400 terabytes from a single victim. And they can also specify the kinds of files they want or the kinds of files they don't want in their software. And so it automatically starts exfiltrating the files that are interesting to them. And I've seen other platforms, I don't think it's on this one, but I've seen other platforms where they specify, I only want the documents that are named confidential or classified, or I only want the financial documents or something like that. They'll put in those platforms, I want copies of any insurance policies or things like that. Because if you have cyber insurance and they have a copy of your cyber insurance policy, they know exactly what you can pay. And that's very, very cleverly done, but it's very sophisticated attack. Here's the sort of good news, but it's a little bit also depressing because it seems to be not, people don't seem to be doing these things, but in most of the cases that we've done, we learn at the end of the case how the threat actor initially gained that access and how they did their damage. We learn this from the technical incident response firms that we're typically partnered with on this. These are the people that parachute in and quarantine things and try to figure out how the bad guy got in, and they write a big report. But also, if we are paying the threat actor, which happens on occasion, if we are making a payment to get the decryptor and to get them to quote unquote delete the files, and I'm sure there'll be questions about that later, we ask them for a report. We ask them to provide us a report, and believe it or not, they do. It's not like a PricewaterhouseCoopers quality report, but they often are pretty proud about how they gained access, and they'd like to explain to you how they did. And so we learn all of these things, and it's mostly preventable. And it's not necessarily preventable by buying expensive cybersecurity tools. And most of you will roll your eyes at this, but some of the most basic things that we should be doing from a cybersecurity perspective are sort of the initial access vectors that these guys are leveraging. And number one of it is credential and password policy. Those are the things that they seem to be able to gain access on, the easiest. We keep making mistakes in this area. And what I mean by credential policy, by the way, is I mean that you should not, you or your staff should not be using their corporate credentials on anything unrelated to the business. Because if you use your corporate credentials on, I like to pick on iloveknitting.com. That lady's not really good at security. She's really good knitting instructor, but she's not great at security. And so her site gets popped and your corporate credential email is in there. Then they'll use that as a target. They have automated tools that will go look for your name and other breaches and things like that. And if you've ever reused a password, they will find that out, and then they will do what's called fuzzing, and they'll try to find different variations of that password, and they'll start trying to log into your systems remotely, and it's all automated. And it only takes one success for them to get in. And so this is something that we can all control. And using a password manager or sort of an identity management system is a good way to make this scalable for an organization. I won't get into the weeds on this. The other thing that we tend to do poorly is update our systems. And I'm not talking about like server patching and stuff like that. Most mature organizations have vulnerability management programs that are patching their servers and things like that. What we're bad at is at the user level, updating our systems in a timely fashion. And what I mean is, when your iPhone or whatever tells you, hey, it's time to update, but you're busy playing Wordle, I'd say stop playing Wordle and update your iPhone, because typically they're doing that because they found a mistake that they've made and they're trying to solve a problem before it becomes a problem for you. And same with your browser and your operating system on your computer and all of these things. And so I mentioned backups. I do want to say, we have had case after case where one of two things happen. The organization goes, hey, we're not paying these guys. Screw these guys. We've got great backups. And we have backups of our backups and backups of those backups. And I'm like, great. I don't want to pay them either. I don't know what they do with the money. Let's just do these backups. So one or two things within a business day or two, they will call me back and say, they got all the backups. And that's part of the dwell time. They've gotten very good at learning about our backup processes and learning how to disrupt those things. It is very difficult to keep that from them. Obviously, sort of air-gapped backups and things like that are more effective, but those are very cumbersome and very expensive to maintain, especially for an entire organization. They also, and this is where the second part comes in, they'll either call me back for that way, or they'll come back and say, it turns out that we do have the backups, but it's going to take us 2 years to restore this, or I'm exaggerating, but months, and we can't be down for that long, and so we might need to make a payment. And so backup technologies are getting better and better and more clever about protecting us from this, but don't rely too heavily on your backups as your safety net, is what I'm saying. I won't go through all of these, but you guys get the idea. And of course, we continue to click on things that we should not click on. I know you all get this training from KnowBe4 or somebody like that to try to teach us what to click on and what not to click on. It's still happening. The one thing I will say that I've seen a lot of on the dark web lately, over the last year, let's say, is insider threat solicitation. So what these bad guys will do is they'll get on these Telegram channels and they'll say, look, we're looking for someone inside an organization that looks like this. Sometimes they'll name the organization by name or like a category. Like, we're looking for someone who's a mid-level manager at a bank, and we will pay you $50,000 to click on this email we're going to send you. And people do that. It happens all the time. And so even if we're getting this training about what to click on and what not to click on, they're finding ways to manipulate the staff. You find one disgruntled worker, you offer, or somebody who's in a financial situation, and it's really hard to reverse that. I always like to sort of make this overture. when I started doing this work, I was briefing sort of a think tank, and there were some federal law enforcement folks involved, and we were talking about how bad this was. And one of the things that they were focusing on in this meeting was, they were talking about critical infrastructure, and they were talking about how we really need to focus on bolstering critical infrastructure. And if I back up for a second, when GroupSense started doing the work, we didn't even advertise we did it, because most of the companies, or most of the ways that companies came to us, were through insurance companies or law firms, and we didn't really need to advertise. That channel just kind of brought it to our door. And then about 6 months into the practice, a large law firm came to us and said, "Hey, we're about to bring you a new client, but they went on your website. It doesn't say you do this anywhere." And so we said, okay, I guess we should probably add a page about this work. And once we did, everyone else in the world started showing up at our door. And when I mean everyone else, I mean from dry cleaners to small consulting companies, or accounting companies, things like that. But a lot of them were small to medium businesses across America. And when I spoke up in that meeting and I said, "Hey guys, I'm concerned at the volume of that I think is occurring across the country to the average small to medium business," they reminded me that they really needed to prioritize critical infrastructure. And my response to that was, I think small to medium business collectively is critical infrastructure. It is the backbone of our economy, and it employs more than half the people in the country at the moment. And for every colonial pipeline that we see a ransomware attack on the news, there's 1,000 businesses in Main Street that go out of business or are materially harmed by these attacks. And so I've made a mission of doing a lot of pro bono work. I've worked with a number of nonprofits and universities to go do this work for free on behalf of small businesses that don't have. I also have this concept of what I call the cyber poverty line. The problem with the cybersecurity industry for a lot of mid-level companies is that we're building these very high volume sort of complicated cybersecurity tools, and they're not only are they expensive, but they're just tools. They're often marketed as solutions, but they're really just tools, and tools need operators. And there's a shortage of cybersecurity talent in the industry. So given the expense and also supply and demand, that drives salaries up. There's a lot of companies who just can't afford the sophisticated tools, but they have the same needs from a digital connectivity perspective as their larger counterparts. And so they have that same sort of risk of being connected to the internet and being able to be shut down. And so, my argument around, patriotism is, if each individual just does the things that I put on that previous screen for themselves, whether that's at the organization or at home, it makes it that much harder for the bad guys to be successful. And I think as a result, we would be protecting what I consider one of the backbones of the U.S. economy and critical infrastructure. And so that's one of my arguments, that cyber hygiene is a patriotic act. I know it's cheesy, but I feel very strongly that is true. And then I want to talk a little bit about what do you do if you get attacked. And obviously, hopefully, you guys will get a copy of these. Obviously, it's also going to be published, so you can look at this again. But I'm not going to walk through all of these. I will talk about a few that I think are critical. I already mentioned, do not engage the threat actors until you have a professional. Don't shut things down. You should have legal counsel as a part of this, sort of built into your response plan. And you should bring them in early, because, and I'm sure some of you know this, but depending on where you're located as an organization, there are lots of sort of regulatory rules about disclosure, and there's timeframes attached to those rules. And so not only is it expensive to be offline, and it may be expensive to have to pay a ransom, but also the tertiary is you might have to pay a bunch of fines. And so we want to avoid that, right? I believe very strongly in engaging an external incident response firm that specializes in this. If you have insurance. not only do you want to contact them, but you should be reading the fine print in your insurance policy, because sometimes that is also dictating the order in which you do the things that are on the screen, and also have a time timeline associated with it. We take care of the compliance for you. So there's certain SEC and Treasury Department regulations, including OFAC, the Office of Foreign Asset Control, controls that might prevent us from even engaging with the threat actor. So if you're bringing in a professional responder, we're going to help you with that to make sure that you're not doing something that gets you on a nasty list with the Treasury Department. And then most importantly, after the event, and this is where I expected questions about this, the threat actors are going to tell you, let's say you've paid the ransom, hypothetically, the threat actors are going to tell you that they deleted the data they took from you. This is probably not true, and there's no way to prove it. So we do ask for proof. Sometimes they give us logs, sometimes they give us videos of them deleting it, things like that. But just assume, considering how cheap storage is, and also they probably gave a copy to the FSB, that data is still out there. And we highly recommend putting some kind of monitoring system in place post-incident to make sure that you're that if that data or some subset of that data surfaces after the incident, that you're aware of that you're you want to get a call from the monitoring company before you hear from a law firm or a customer or the media about this data resurfacing. That's really it on the talk. I'll take questions. I do have a book coming out about the cyber espionage industry and about the ransomware and negotiation components of this. And I'll also say, on the negotiation side of things, this is not something we're just winging. We've partnered with some.
Hey, Kurtis, definitely really appreciate it. I think it's been very beneficial. So we're going to open it up now for questions. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to enter it into the chat, and we definitely love to be able to get Kurtis's opinion on it. So feel free to enter it in. I do have a couple of questions on my end, so I'll definitely kick it off. So Kurtis, from your standpoint, what's one of the biggest mistakes that companies usually make around ransomware?
Well, I think the biggest mistake is not having a response plan in place, or having a response plan but not having practiced the response plan. And I think that that precipitates a lot of the other mistakes, right? So what you don't want to do is start trying to figure out how to save your company from one of these attacks on the day that it occurs. You also don't want to meet your law firm, about this for the first time on the day that it occurs. You don't want to meet your incident responders on the first time on the day that it occurs. You want all of this stuff sort of already pre-designed. You want to have those relationships already. You want to have done some practice or tabletop type exercises to practice the plan. And I've seen both sides of this, and I can tell you definitively that it goes so much better when you have planned something in advance. That aside, I mean, that's a kind of a catch-all. One of the biggest mistakes I've seen is companies actually engaging and trying to talk to the bad guys before they have a plan, or before they've brought in a responder, and that tends to go pretty poorly.
Got it. So how do you look at this, and how do you, from the ransomware side, and how do you think it really impacts national security overall?
Yeah, I think there's a misunderstanding of our adversaries' sort of perspective on cyber warfare, and that goes all the way back to the hyperbolic first slide, right? Our definition in the United States of cyber warfare is, I believe, much narrower than our adversaries. Our adversaries, and I forget the Russian, it's like informatsioniya voyna or something like that, is the Russian word for their version of cyber war, but it's basically information warfare. And their definition of information warfare is much broader than our cyber warfare sort of lens. And I believe firmly that ransomware activity the disruption and sort of the operational disruption, the data theft, and the financial harm caused by ransomware is part of their actual warfare strategy. And I also mentioned, they're getting copies of all of this data. And one of the things I like to point out to people, and I try to point this out to the policymakers as well, is that, let's say you're Whitney, you were in a breach, and they're like, Whitney, you were in this breach. We're sorry. They sent you one of those letters. We'll do some monitoring for you. But they got your email address and your name, and you go, oh, that doesn't mean anything, right? Like, that's not a big deal. The problem is when you take one breach like that and you combine it with the other data sets and you start correlating those at scale, then it gets dangerous. So it's not, sometimes it looks like a breach is benign. It's not a big deal. They didn't take anything important. But when they combine it with the other data sets, it starts getting really, really dangerous. And I think that's the national security implications of them taking 10 years of data from all of these organizations. And now that we have the computing power we have, and we have sort of generative AI that can look for information and it can look for the proverbial needle in the haystack very effectively. I think it's extremely dangerous that our opponents and our adversaries have this data.
So I agree. And if we take that a level further, my name, my email, where I live, if you take that a lot further, a lot of the companies, within SAME work on digital platforms to submit their bids, to share files. They also use it for, say, design files or a project management system. Right. But there's a lot of other critical data. So I think that's, if those resources are locked, all of a sudden compromised, so there's an imminent restriction on them or locked, so it could hit the opportunity they can go after. They're the
absolutely
instant. Yeah. So how do they be, what's the preventative, I guess, maintenance you see on that, or what can they do to get ahead of the game?
Yeah, I mean, I think start with the simple things that were on that previous slide. Let's as an organization decide that we're going to be a cyber-focused organization, a cybersecurity-focused organization. It's almost a cultural thing that you have to build into the organization, because if, like to your point, if certain schematics or designs got out, especially for certain kinds of buildings that we're building overseas and things like that, it is a national security issue. And if you're one of the smaller suppliers, that might be a business-ending event for you if that gets out. So first and foremost, the rank and file folks in the organization need to take cybersecurity very seriously, and it has to be part of the corporate culture. Then the rest of it's fairly technical controls around sort of least privileged access to that data and proper encryption and things like that. It gets kind of in the technical weeds, but none of those more technical things matter if those basic things aren't taken care of first. Because if someone, one of my favorite things to correct journalists on is when they talk about, even going back to like the Colonial Pipeline example, they talk about the bad guys hacked them. They didn't hack them. They logged in. They didn't.
They really did. Yeah, you're absolutely
really
right.
Did. And so my point is if you got legitimate credentials, that doesn't set off any alarms. That doesn't set off your intrusion detection system that just cost you $200,000 to implement, right? Because it's not an intrusion according to that system. It's someone legitimately logging into a remote access device. So that's the stuff that basic stuff kind of can pull the rug right out from under your other cybersecurity investments.
Got it. That's a very valid point. But right now there's current talk about who has access to a lot of government records. Like DOJ is looking through records, Social Security, IRS, VA benefits, the list goes on. So how confident can or should we be that there to any disruption happening right now and our information is secure, and what can we do about it if it's not? I know, it's kind of like you have to have a crystal ball on this.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'll try to stay out of the politics of this because it's
absolutely
divisive. But I do think I am already on record. I think Mashable had an article where I talked about this a little bit that got some attention, and my concerns are that perhaps, and from what I've read, that some of the folks in these organizations are not following the standard security procedures of the organizations that they're sort of auditing or getting involved in. So they're using their personal laptops, personal emails, personal phones, and sort of just sidestepping a lot of the normal security controls. That is a major concern. And I do think, that when just on the GroupSense side, on the cyber espionage side, I can't correlate this directly, but I can tell you that the number of like sort of classified documents and sort of very confidential documents that we see being proliferated around dark web forums and chat rooms has increased a lot over the last like 45, 60 days. And so that could be a coincidence, but I do think that there's likely some impact from having folks sidestepping those controls.
Got it. Okay. And so if a company or an individual could do any one thing today to protect themselves, what would your recommendation be?
I would use a password manager. That would be the first thing I would do. And I don't want to, sort of mansplain this to the audience. If they're technical people, they understand this. But what these tools do is you end up having one password or passphrase for the password manager itself, and then it creates a bunch of random passwords for everything that you access. And that way, you don't have. Not only do you not have the same password on any system, you're not reusing passwords, but you don't even know what those passwords are, and you don't have to know. So they're like 26 plus characters long with weird stuff. And I think that, the considering how often the credential reuse angle of attack is successful, I think that would be one of the first things I would tell people to start doing at home also, but also at work. And I'm working on a new talk that I call like the digital butterfly effect. If you're one of the things that continues to get asked or mentioned is like, hey, if the dry cleaner gets attacked, that's not a national security issue. That's just the dry cleaner. And my argument is maybe it's not a big deal that the dry cleaner is impacted, but who are their customers? And
yeah, that's true. That's
right.
Very true.
And so it starts to snowball. And if you're not securing yourself, and you work for an organization that is a supplier to a national security organization or something like that, it's you start pulling on those threads, and you can connect those things, and that's what's dangerous. And so I think we all have a responsibility.
Absolutely. We had a couple questions come
Sure.
in. So if a company's breach data includes the personal data of customers, how should the customer respond?
How should the victim respond? I assume you mean like how the impacted organization?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something, when you go back to bringing in, counsel, your lawyers are going to tell you what you're required to do by law. And another big mistake I've seen, and this also goes back to the planning, is how we communicate these things. I like to tell organizations when I do a lot of these tabletop exercises, and I help companies build these response plans now based on what I've seen. And so I like to tell organizations, keep in mind that after one of these incidents, you're going to need a tremendous amount of goodwill from your peers, your constituents, and your partners, and your employees, and so on. And the quickest way to squander that goodwill is to make them think you're lying to them. And so my instruction, I'm not a PR person or a lawyer, but my best practice guidance has always been be as gratuitously transparent to all of the involved parties as you can be within your strict knowledge boundary. So no speculation. If you don't know, you don't know, right? And so I think that will yield the best long-term result. But you should also have a sort of a crisis public relations person, standing next to your lawyer while you're talking about how do we communicate the impact of this. And then the way that plays out in the ransom decision, and that's I could do a whole talk on how do we decide whether to pay a ransom or not. But basically, one of those is, do we have a moral obligation to make sure that the data that they have isn't displayed publicly? And that might be a thing. And so if you've got the personal information of your customers or partners, that might play into that equation.
Okay, no, that's a great breakdown. So one of the hottest things in the last week or so has been Signal. and I was thinking about Signal, but also other non-secure text programs. Are there better solutions if you absolutely need to send secure messages, or could you just break down a little bit on how Signal
Sure.
works, or how the
Sure.
encryption could work, but also how hackers can also compromise it as well?
Yeah. I'll try to give the most concise answer to that as possible.
Sure.
So there's a lot of tools that do what they refer to as end-to-end encrypted messaging, meaning that once you send the message, as it's in transit across the internet etherware universe, as it's going across the wire, no one can read it. And that's true. That's true for Signal. Signal's a nonprofit. It's run by one of the well-known cybersecurity leaders. And so it is secure. The message is from end to end. The key part of, and that's true for a number of other platforms. The only thing I will say is that I have heard that a number of the other platforms like WhatsApp, Telegram, etc., may be compromised in certain governments. So, for perhaps like the Saudi government has paid somebody at WhatsApp to, put something in their internet infrastructure that allows them to man in the middle and read those messages. I'm not saying that I have evidence of that, but I've heard stories about this being the case. So that could always be the case that they're compromised in some way or have a backdoor. But the end-to-end part, I think, is the main thing that people have to understand is if it's on your phone, like the message you sent is on your phone and the message you receive ends up on your phone, despite the fact that nobody can read it from the transit of that message, if you have to read it on your phone and you can see it on your phone, then it's not encrypted on your phone. And that brings into question the security of your device, right? If I'm a bad guy and I want to know what your Signal messages are, I don't try to find a way to intercept Signal messages in the internet. I try to get visibility to your phone. And that's where the real threat is. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm doing the mental gymnastics in my head. Now I'm tracking. Yeah. I'm picking up what you're putting down here.
Yeah. Right on.
Yeah. Absolutely. But hey, if any of you have any additional questions for Kurtis, his contact information is on the slide. He's put his information in the chat. Feel free to reach out to him if you have any additional questions or more personalized questions that you don't want to have in an open forum. He'd be more than happy to respond to them. But for that,
one of the things
Kurtis,
I wanted to
yeah, sure.
point out that one of the things I do in the book is there's an entire chapter on OPSEC or operational security that I think is applicable to everyone, and it's the longest chapter in the book, and it basically tells, if I can summarize, it basically is explaining how do you simultaneously participate in a digital connected world that we're in and not compromise yourself. What are the tools to do that? And I try to write it in the least technical manner possible. So there's some good stuff in there that isn't all nerd. And I've written the book in a way that's largely consumable. Has lots of great stories from my antics with the bad guys. There's sort of some humor in there too. But there's a chapter on operational security that I think is pretty powerful.
That's great. So again, yeah. Kurtis, thank you very much, and thank you everyone for participating in today's session. We appreciate your time here today. Very, very, very informative, and had some great takeaways as always to our post. So thank you all again. But before we wrap up our program, I'd like to share with you all some events that we have planned. So please mark your calendar for some upcoming local post events, as well as some upcoming SAME national events. So our next First Friday webinar is PFAS Compliance by 2029, Rapid Pathways to Success on Friday, May 2nd. You won't want to miss this essential webinar featuring Al LeBlanc at CDM Smith. And are you interested in sharing your knowledge on current educational topics for First Friday series with our members? We are accepting presentation abstracts for summer 2025. So visit our website To learn more and submit your topic today, sponsorships are also available to support this popular program. Several national programs are in full swing. We'd like to invite you to participate. Voting for the SAME National Board of Direction election is open now through April 15th. Make your voice heard by casting your vote today for President-elect, Vice President, and elected directors to help shape the future of our society. We're getting ready for the premier training conference of the year. It's the SAME JETC, which will be held May 13 through 15 in Louisville, Kentucky. It's a great educational session, opportunity briefings, networking, awards dinner, and fun this whole conference. Learn more and register at samejetc.org. And we're going to have a busy schedule here at the DC Post. Now through the end of the month, our DC Post Scholarship Program is accepting applications for the STEM higher education students. We have $75,000 to share with future AEC leaders and students, and they can earn up to $10,000 each. The deadline has been extended to Friday, April 18th. Be sure to share this with a student you know. And join the DC and Nova Post for a fun lunch and project tour at George Washington Mount Vernon on Friday, April 11th. Tom Whitmore from the Christian Company will be there sharing details about the renovation projects going on at this historic site. There are only a few tickets left, so don't wait to register. And then celebrate National Maritime Day with the DC and Baltimore Post with a special open house tour on the decommissioned nuclear ship, the NS Savannah, at the Baltimore shipyard on Sunday, May 18th. The NS Savannah Association is hosting the educational tour from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. So meet up with your SAME friends at 1:30 p.m. No RSVP required for this free fun event for the whole family. So we've just opened up registration for our summer kickoff with a rooftop happy hour at the historical Watergate office building. The event is hosted by IA, the Interior Architects, and brought to you as a joint networking event with SAME DC and the DBIA Mid-Atlantic region. Sponsorships are available and tickets are limited. Register today for a lively conversation and amazing views of Washington, DC from this iconic building. And then ready for another fun activity networking event. We have partnered up with the Nova Post and GovCon Rockstars to bring another networking event and rock climbing. Don't miss this event on Thursday, June 28th at Sport Rock Alexandria, and the whole family is welcome. And again, save the date for the DC and Nova Post as we return for our third year to the Capitol turnaround for their 17th annual Small Business Conference for expanded two-day event you won't want to miss. It's our premier Mid-Atlantic conference for federal, state, and local opportunities focused on building your small business network with matchmaking and a veteran career center. We have many more events planned for the rest of the year. Be sure to visit our DC Post website to see a full list of our educational and social events throughout the year. Connect with us on LinkedIn and share as we share industry news, event photos, all while building a strong network in the AEC industry. You can watch all of our past First Friday webinar sessions on our YouTube channel as well. And would you like to reach a community of 7,000 architects, engineers, construction, and technology leaders with a DC Post annual sponsorship? You have the opportunity to leverage our networks to showcase your firm with visibility and international recognition you won't get anywhere else. Support the annual sponsorship, program sponsorship, just like this First Friday series, or at individual events throughout the year, like our upcoming small business conference at the Capitol turnaround. Check out all the benefits of sponsorship and support the mission of DC Post and your community today. So again, thank you all for attending this First Friday webinar. And Kurtis, thank you very much for providing educational content today for our April First Friday series. Look for an email labeled document delivery in the subject line with the slides, PDH certificate, opt-in list of registered participants today, and we'll be posting the recording on the DC Post website later on this month. You also get an email from our presenter with more information about what is presented today and how you can sign up for their newsletter and announcements on events in our educational session as well. And don't forget to download the chat before you leave later on. And so thank you again to our DC Post First Friday sponsors, Fox Rothschild, KCCT, Parsons Corporation, and Stantec. So on behalf of myself, Bree Beal, and Samantha Long, have a great weekend. We look forward to seeing you at the next event. Thank you all.